Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist, and with another edition of Friends and Enemies. With me is my co-host Alex Benesch in Germany. I'm in the USA. We've got a lot of news this week to cover. Changes. The Wall Street Journal had a piece. Russia builds up military bases along Finland border. Satellite images show. This definitely confirms what Lee Wheelbarger has been telling me. And I've had a number of postings on my website about Wheelbarger's work, who's engaged in private intelligence collection on the Russian troop movements and buildup. We've got Trump's shift back towards Ukraine, away from Russia, after Russia did a drone and missile attack on Kiev that outraged the president. You had Macron and Keir Starmer getting together at the Pope's funeral, getting Trump to sit down with Zelensky. And it looks like the Russians have been so cavalier about assuming Trump is going to cover for them and hurt Ukraine, they have basically given up the possibility of a peace deal on their terms. Of course, I don't think it was ever realistic. Maybe the Russians were only marking time. It seems to me with this buildup, and it's quite serious. And I'm going to be doing a little broadcast with Wheelbarger and Johnny Anderson every week on Thursdays to cover the updates on the buildup. Look, this buildup is serious. Russia is focusing now on an attack to the rear of Ukraine, and the rear of Ukraine is NATO, which is underdefended. And of course, the hope was that the U.S. would not be defending Ukraine, but then there's been this increase in Chinese military air traffic, transport traffic into Russia, starting in April, starting last month. And this increase is staggering. It's a 30 to 100-fold increase, according to Wheelbarger's numbers. If we get an exact number, we'll give it to you. But why would China's why would China's military traffic into Russia expand so massively in April of 2025? It's because China's under this economic pressure from the U.S. They have decided to decouple from the U.S. The Chinese economy is faltering. There are young people in the streets, young men protesting outside of factories. They're having to close factories. The people are being thrown out of work. China needs a regional war, says Luda Media, the Chinese dissident media source here in the U.S. So I wonder what you think, Alex, with the Pope's funeral, with all that's taken place in recent days. How do you see things?
I mean, well, the days are certainly over of business as usual now. And usually you get a new administration and they say it's going to be different this time, and then it's all the same. Especially with the trade deficit, especially with the these brewing disasters of epic proportions, like Iran pursuing nuclear weapons or already having them, especially the weapon designs, because it's like you can get these weapons, gun designs from the Russians, from North Korea through proxies and all that. The North Korean situation there's all these things, and we've watched them year after year after year, and this fatigue was setting in with people out there, voters. They would think, well, yeah, I mean, you can follow the news and listen to some experts, but nothing dramatic is ever coming out of this. So why should I worry about the Iranians and the North Koreans and all these other, and the Russians, and why should I worry? Because it's always the same, right? There's like big talk, and then nothing comes out of it, and maybe there's some sort of a proxy war, as people understand them, and then it's over and life goes on. The Syrian war, you can just turn it off, right? You could just at some point turn off your television or switch the channel, and then it just disappears from your mind. People tried to do this with the Ukrainian war, right? At the beginning, we all remember this. Everybody was glued to their television. Everybody was glued to the internet, watching these things unfold. Some people saying the Russians are going to walk over Ukraine. It's going to be over in a week, or and then things shifted. And so people were watching this frantically, and then they were watching it less, and they were watching it less, and they switched the channels and listened to something else. And then came, of course, all this this propaganda war, that's not our war. We're not concerned about that. And I think the Russians have been trying to use that dynamic because most people are too busy anyways. Most people are tired. So of course, if you tell people, well, the Ukraine thing, it's just another thing. It's just one of those things. You can just turn it off, and nothing big's gonna come out of this. Nothing dramatic. But for the last couple of years, it's been clear that this is gonna be huge. I mean, I have some numbers here just to make people understand this. It says here the Nordics have emerged as a model for Europe's defense. Think about that. I mean, usually when you talked about Finland's army or Sweden's army, they were so tiny and nobody was paying any attention to them. And now it says the Nordics are a model for us. The 4 main Nordic countries are among Europe's top donors of military aid to Ukraine by population and have taken steps to usher in a new regional security architecture. Combined, the Nordics have an economy about the size of Mexico's and nearly the same size as Russia's. Following Sweden and Finland's accession to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, they've pooled some of their forces. Sweden boasts an advanced defense industry that makes submarines, battle tanks, and supersonic jet fighters. Norway possesses maritime surveillance and fighting capabilities in the Arctic. Finland has one of the largest standing armies and artillery forces per capita in Europe. And Denmark's special forces have decades of experience deploying to some of the most dangerous parts of Afghanistan and Iraq to fight American wars. Blah 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 blah, and then
I should mention here that Finland in World War II fought very hard against the Russians, against the Soviet Union. The Russians invaded Finland on November 30th, 1939, not long after Hitler invaded Poland, and after the Soviet Union also invaded Poland on September 17th, 1939. The Russians invaded Finland. Russians attacked their own artillery positions with their own artillery and blamed the Finns as the cause of the invasion. And of course, the invasion was bloodily repulsed initially in the winter, called the Winter War. They attacked a fortified line between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga. Lagoda, I think it's how you say it. Is it Ladoga or Lagoda? Anyway, that giant lake that's north of St. Petersburg, what used to be Leningrad. They had this giant fortified line, and the Russians stormed into it. And some say that the Russians lost 500,000 men during the Winter War campaign.
Wow.
They did the battles. They tried to invade Finland in the north and in the center of the country, to cut the country in half, and they lost like 4 tank divisions trying to cut Finland in half. Ski troops knocking trees down in front of the tank columns, throwing Molotovs onto the tanks, basically forced these 4 Soviet tank divisions to surrender. So Finland has a history, even then, of fighting. And what a lot of people don't know is that Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish young men volunteered to fight in volunteer brigades of the Finnish army during the war. It was a very common thing. A lot of Swedes fought in World War II in Finnish uniform. So this is the Scandinavia has this history in World War II of fighting the Russians. So whatever anybody else was doing, Scandinavia's eyes were on Russia. The Germans did invade and occupy Norway, but they left Sweden and Finland alone. In fact, Germany supported Finland against the Soviet Union. Finland was the only democracy on the side of the Axis, on the side of the Germans in World War II. And at the end of the war, they got a separate deal, thanks to President Roosevelt and the Americans, who saw Finland as the victim of Soviet aggression and allowed Finland to change sides at the end of the war, at the very last part of the war.
So people can see this right here now. Now this big chunk of mostly empty territory, this is Russia, okay? So you got Moscow, you got St. Petersburg. These are the Baltics. They're being threatened, obviously, and this would be...
You've got the German names on this map.
Yeah, unfortunately. So this is like, what do you call it? Estonia, Latvia.
Latvia and Lithuania, yeah.
Yeah, this is all German here.
You've got the German words for those countries.
Yeah, this is Ukraine. This is Ukraine. It's quite large. It's about the size of France. That's tells you a lot about the task that the
I
Russians
think
have got
Ukraine
here.
is a little bigger than France, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
it's a big country,
so
Ukraine.
this thing here is Belarus. This is a state that's largely under Russian control, but they're getting very, very nervous to be in the middle of all this mess. There you got the Baltics. Then here you got Poland. Poland is also quite large, and next to Poland, obviously, is Germany. To the north, you have Denmark. You got Denmark, and then we got Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Now, look, people, look at this insanely large border between Finland and Mother Russia. It's incredibly long. Everybody's fortifying their borders now. The Polish are fortifying their borders, so it gets harder to go through this with tanks. I mean, everything gets slowed down and bottlenecked.
This is, by the way, this is Finland is difficult. Look at the lakes and the swamps and the rivers in Finland. You can see that in the invasion routes into Finland are divided up into small little passages through these open ground. So it's not easy for an army to invade Finland. I
Yeah.
think Finland is much more difficult in terms of the terrain to invade than Ukraine, which is open and flat and has as defensive barriers these large rivers.
I mean, how long? I mean, how long do the Russians want to make their front line? I mean, look at, for comparison, right? This is Ukraine, and we all know that Russia has taken bits of Ukraine, like here in the south, and of course,
About
Crimea.
20% of Ukraine is occupied by the Russians
So
right now.
this is
Mostly in the east.
this is the border. This is the original true border in modern times between Russia and Ukraine. So it's fairly large, and it's quite a huge undertaking to get the forces in, get them supplied. We've seen the bad supply line, the bad supply lines from the Russians, even at the beginning of the war, right? I mean, all their fuel trucks got shot up, and now they're using donkeys and whatnot.
Yeah, there were drones.
Yeah.
Drones have taken out a lot of Russian trucks. The Russians have lost over 30,000 trucks.
Yeah. So
which is incredible.
Compare this length of a border with this. This is the border between Finland and Russia. So I mean, imagine how tough that job really is. I mean, where do you go in? Where do you try to go in first? Where do you try to go in second? I mean, these are all considerations that have been made, that need to be made by professionals. But these professionals, they have to work with what they got. So again, the same problems as before in Ukraine will occur when it comes to attacking Finland. So let's say the order comes down, we want this and that to happen in the attack against Finland, and then the generals, they have to organize the attack as it was ordered, and then the generals, they have to let the orders trickle down. Okay, we need X amount of tanks, X amount of this, X amount of that. But then they find out that, somebody stole the night vision gear, somebody stole bits of special armor, somebody stole this, somebody stole that. And it's like, what's been ordered, it's not necessarily arriving when it comes to, when it comes to the actual
Well, I should
battlefield.
say something about a number of things about this Finnish border. First, we're looking at a Mercator projection. So Finland looks larger than it does on a map like this because of the exaggeration of the far northern areas. But because there are so many lakes and swamps in Finland, the actual frontage needed to be covered by troops is much smaller than in Ukraine. So, for example, in World War II, that was a whole front. The Soviet army was stretched along the whole Finnish border, but they only needed 2 or 3 armies to cover that whole border. Whereas down south, they had dozens of armies covering the main front. And of course, that has to do with the fact that this front can be covered more easily. Look at all the lakes. Look at all the lakelets. You only need to defend between these lakes. But now you have an interesting thing. What the Russians are deploying in Finland are amphibious APCs to carry troops, which means these amphibious APCs can go across these lakes and swamps and flank the Finnish forces. So the Russians have specifically picked out a special type of vehicle, troop-carrying vehicle, to move troops across these lakes, so that suddenly Finland becomes much more open if you're using troop carriers that are amphibious and can go over the lakes. That's one of the observations that Wheelbarger has made, is look, all these APCs the Russians are stashing in the Finnish border, those are capable of crossing lakes.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point that should be thought of by strategists. Is like, the implication is they're going to go around. Always warfare is about flanking. You want to get behind. Just like you have eyes in the front of your head, you don't have them in back. Somebody attacks you from behind, you're weak. Armies are the same thing for different reasons. In ancient times, the armies were guys lined up with their shields and their spears facing the same direction. So you wanted to attack them in the flank, especially by light infantry or cavalry, right? But today they say, well, armies are much more flexible. Men have guns. They can just turn around. It's easy. Not really, because there's what's called the logistical rear. Behind an army are its communication lines, its supply depots, all the things it needs to breathe, to live. You get behind. Today, flanking is like the Blitzkrieg with the panzers. They pierce the line, they go behind, they tear up the communications lines, they take the supply depots from behind, and the army is completely disrupted. And this is a form of disruption attack. It was actually invented by U.S. Grant in the Civil War. And of course, Sherman's march to Atlanta was an example. From Atlanta to the sea was an example of that, tearing up telegraph lines, raiding supply depots, taking food stockpiles. That's sort of the Blitzkrieg, is a refinement of that idea that Grant and Sherman used in the American Civil War. So this is what the Russians would like to practice. Of course, the ultimate form of rear attack is to use nuclear weapons against the enemy's rear, which of course they can then do to you. So that's problematic. But strategic bombing is a flanking attack. It just flanks from above rather than from the left or the right flank. So that's what warfare really is based on. And just as a basic understanding, when you're looking at this, it's not a direct, straightforward thing at all, what we're looking at.
Look at this territory. I mean, yeah, it's a handful. I mean, it really is. Yeah, it's like I mean, armies had tried to push into Russia before. I mean, we know about Napoleon. We know about Hitler. And it's like
we know about Charles XII of Sweden invaded Russia too.
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, I mean, if you had a certain number of troops and horses and everything, and you had the intelligence, you could sort of gain a lot of ground in a short time. With just plowing through territory. And in modern times, the Nazis, they would just get every soldier that they could on amphetamines and let them run through the night and just blitzkrieg the heck out of the enemy and just rush forward. But even then, the supply lines became insanely long. I mean, how long can you make a supply line and have it intact? And that's when the Germans failed, essentially, because they didn't have a strategic bomber force to just destroy the Russians' production facilities. So yeah, that was then the end of that. I mean, other than the idiotic plan that was used to push into Russia. I mean, I think we've talked about that one before. And yeah, it's all about technical capabilities and intelligence these days.
Well, in the breaking news, Serbian president was just rushed to the military hospital in Belgrade. And the other front, Russia would like to link up with Serbia, which is an ally to the south. And I think Bulgaria as a NATO country and Hungary as a NATO country may not be reliable allies of NATO. I'm not quite as sure about Bulgaria, but a lot of the establishment in Bulgaria is the old Communist Party elite, and they have close Bulgaria tends to be a country with a lot of sentimental connection to Russia. Serbia as well. Serbia is an Orthodox country. In the former Yugoslavia, you have Croatia, Serbia, and of course Bosnia. The Bosnians are Muslims, the Croatians are Catholics, and the Serbians are Orthodox. And that has turned out to be a big dividing line in that country. But with the Serbian president, there seems to be an effort to get back of Russian control in Belgrade in advance of what appears to be a Russian buildup for a general war with NATO. And of course, Serbia could play an important role in that war as a country with a flanking position.
All right, let me just get to another part of this world, which is now also entering Europe. Now, this was like maybe a week ago or something like that. Let me just get to my notes here. It says here, North Korea, Russia acknowledge presence of North Korean troops in the Ukraine conflict for first time. So now it's official. Terrific. So on Saturday, I don't remember which Saturday, the Kremlin claimed it had regained control of the Kursk region. That day, during a video call with President Vladimir Putin, General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the General Staff of Russia's armed forces, praised North Korean fighters for helping defeat Ukrainian forces, acknowledging their presence for the first time. In an announcement posted to the Kremlin website Monday morning, Putin praised the North Korean troops for their role in Kursk. Quote, "We are confident that the relations of friendship, good neighborliness, and cooperation between our countries forged on the battlefield will continue to develop successfully and dynamically in all directions." On Monday, North Korean state media reported that leader Kim Jong-un had decided to deploy troops under a mutual defense pact he signed with Putin last year. Isn't that interesting? Now, so people remember where that is. Let me just pull that one up on pull that one up on the map here, so people can get a sense of where everything is, because ultimately, you know, everything's going to be America's problem eventually if things go on like they have been progressing so far. Okay, so we got Europe here. These are the Nordics up there. This is Ukraine. This is Ukraine. And the North Koreans, they come from all the way from Asia. Let me just move past move past China here. Let's just try to move that in the correct way. So here we get Cambodia, Thailand. This is Japan, and this is North Korea. Okay, it's a tiny looking country, but if people look over here at this tiny little border here, this little thingy majingy here, this means that Koreans, you can put Koreans into trains and then move them through Russia, all the way through Russia, and then into Ukraine. Okay, so of course the Koreans will have some forces. They need a strong presence here in the South China Sea and this whole region, so they can send everybody that they got to Ukraine. But yeah, this is the whole Pacific region. It's the whole Pacific region, and that battlefield. That's where the North Pole is somewhere. Yeah, this big arena is where a lot of things are going to be happening. So we got the Canada and the United States here. The Russians are over there. Chinese are down there. This is Greenland. It's been talked about a lot. And these are the Nordics. This is Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So this is where it's at. at this point. So I mean, something that's not really, people are not really used to have Asian communist soldiers in Europe, right? I mean, that's a new one. And Russia now has essentially declined a deal proposed by the US administration, even though everybody who was commenting on that deal was saying, well, the Trump administration is bending over backwards. Look how much they're offering. You know, hand over Crimea permanently, hand over other regions permanently, lifting of some sanctions, and this, that, and the other, right? And but there were some things in that proposed deal, such as continuous military force of Ukraine, so protecting what's left of Ukraine, and of course some other things going on in Europe. So it seemed like bending over backwards, but the Russians declined. I think even Lavrov said this. No, actually, we want full capitulation. We want a puppet government in Ukraine, and for the foreseeable future, short term, we want a demilitarization of Ukraine, meaning a total surrender. Because what else would that be? So then we got the minerals deal. Trump administration reached a deal Wednesday with Ukraine, giving the U.S. access to its mineral wealth. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was happy about that. Central to the agreement is an investment fund that both Ukraine and the U.S. will contribute to and oversee, the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. The U.S. and its allies will take the lead in any reconstruction. To be clear, it's a quote from Bessent, to be clear, no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. And the U.S. would be able to count new military aid as a contribution to the fund according to the Ukrainian side. Now that's interesting, right? So this is kind of like a situation where the Trump admin, the Republican administration could keep supplying Ukraine weapons, ammo, intelligence sharing, just money to keep the Ukrainian economy afloat. Then, of course, there's the Ukrainian weapons production. They have a lot of experts, the Ukrainians, and they have the machines, they have the know-how to make stuff. Very high-quality weapons. But at the same time, the Trump administration could say to the U.S. voters, these are not just handouts. We're not just giving away stuff and save Ukraine and get nothing really in return money-wise. Now they can say these weapons deliveries and ammo deliveries and whatnot, this is contributing to this reconstruction fund, and the Americans will get access. Americans will get access to these Ukrainian rare minerals, such as lithium, which is incredibly important, obviously, and others. So isn't that's kind of interesting? You can help Ukraine, but you can also pacify the voters and say, we're not just spending your money. We're not just handing over tax money to Ukraine. We're getting something in return. And I think that's going to be a problem for a lot of these influencers out there who kept saying, this is not our war. This is just going to cost us money and nothing else. It's just very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, the thing about the war is that the mobilization is war was a statement a Russian general made in World War II. And Russia's mobilization, it's funny, why did they wait 3 years, almost 3 years, before they called up 1.3 million men at one time? There's stories out of Russia saying they're going to call up another million in July. They've created the training facilities for this many people. There's new weapons. I don't know if you saw the parade. I did a thing where I looked at the Russian weapons in the parade here for May 9th. These Russian weapons are new. They're new out of the factory. These are armored personnel carriers, T-90 tanks. Lee Wheelbarger has found out that the Russians are producing at least 300 T-90s every year. They may have as many as 600, maybe even 1,000 of these T-90s in reserve. We haven't seen them. They haven't been really used much in Ukraine. And then new kinds of APCs, all with snorkels, with the ability to cross rivers and lakes and swamps and so on. And with advanced electronic gear on them, night vision equipment, things we haven't seen used in Ukraine. We also saw an SS-27 road mobile ICBM carrier transformed, and this is going to be in the parade, transformed into a giant diesel fuel carrier with it's like 3 service stations on one vehicle. I think this is the biggest vehicle in the world. And it's just incredible, the kind of things they're coming up with, whether any of this is practical. But they're manufacturing these things. And we know that they've shifted their industry over to war production, full war production. We know this. And we also know that, it's, again, I quote Andrei Illarionov, who's with the Center for Security Policy and Cato Institute, saying, he's an economist, saying that even though the Russian economy is supposedly small, well, that's in consumer goods. The Russians are outproducing all the NATO countries, including the U.S., 4-1 in military goods. And China has way more productive capacity in military goods than Russia does. And of course, North Korea has produced twice as much ammunition for the Ukraine war as the United States has produced for the Ukraine war.
But it was bad quality. I mean, this is what the Ukrainians were saying on the ground, that when they hear artillery coming in, I mean, they can recognize that sound in any time of the day, they dive down because these things will hit the ground, explode, and send these objects in different directions. But these things don't come apart like they're supposed to, apparently, because the quality. Because of the quality.
Yeah, certainly the quality of Russian, Chinese, and North Korean, certainly military goods, are not the same as ours. But you see, there's this question of quality over quantity. What was it that Lenin and Stalin both said? Quantity is a quality all of its own. It's funny. The military historian John Mosier, who I've corresponded with during the Ukraine war, I thought he was the guy that would be able to interpret it best, and of course he did. He said that this is going to go on a long time. Russia's not going to win a quick victory. He said that from the first week of the war. He anticipated Russian defeats, and he makes the point in his book. He has a great book, Hitler versus Stalin, Death Ride. I think it's one of the most interesting, certainly the most innovative, thoughtful books on the Eastern Front battle between Germany and Soviet Russia in World War II. And he said, look, if you look at a lot of the wars Russia's fought in the 20th century, including the Russian Civil War and the Winter War in Finland, and of course the first couple of years of the war with Germany, Russia was it wasn't unusual for Russia to have a 7-1 ratio of losses over the people they're fighting against. Now, the Russians, like in the Civil War, enjoyed more than a 7-1 advantage in numbers. So the White Army, for example, was outnumbered like 10-1, in the long term in that war, and yet they almost won the war, because they were killing Russians at 7-1. And early in the war, the ratio wasn't that bad, or early on in the Russian Civil War. So in the Winter War, the same thing. You got the whole might of the Soviet Union with over 200 million people attacking, or 180 million people, I guess was the population then, attacking Finland, tiny country, and having difficulty prevailing. And now the war in Russia, and if you go by the numbers, the best casualty numbers we have in the war right now, Ukraine has lost something like 50,000. Russia's lost 350,000 dead. We're talking dead. Casualty ratios are a little different. Maybe Russia's approaching 1 million dead, wounded, and missing, and prisoners. Ukraine maybe is approaching 150,000, maybe a little more than that. So this is what we're looking at in in this war, so that it's a 7-to-1, a 7-to-1 or 6-to-1 ratio of losses over the Russians. Well, the Russians have a 3-to-1 advantage, but if they're losing on the battlefield at 6 or 7-to-1, they're losing the war.
Yeah,
This is what a lot of people don't understand.
it also depends on whom are you losing. Is the dead guy a regular soldier, or is it an experienced person that cannot be replaced? I mean, we saw what the we saw the speed that the Russians have been employing to train new people, but that can be a problem too, because these inexperienced soldiers, they're now going against a highly motivated enemy, the Ukrainians, and there's so many new bits of equipment that are being designed, and it gets easier and easier to train for it. The better the technology, more easy the reloading process, the better the imagery, the shorter the time necessary to train somebody to use these things, because it takes years to create a specialist, right? I mean, he can get shot in 5 seconds.
The real training, Alex, the real training is, look, in Western armies, you've got 80% of the troops are support troops. Only 20% are trigger pullers.
Sure.
In the Russian army, you don't have that ratio. You don't have that ratio in the Ukrainian army. So what does that mean? The people that really require the intensive training are the people that are fixing tanks, that are fixing aircraft, that are keeping helicopters maintained, that are running the supplies and doing the calculations of what's needed. These are all highly technical jobs. Exactly. These aren't as easy as loading a tank or having an autoloader or a machine help you kill the enemy. These are the people that maintain those machines, that make sure those machines work. Because what does a guy on a battlefield who has one of these machines and a rifle do when the machine doesn't work? All he's got is his rifle. Yeah. That's all he's got.
Yeah, I mean, you see, people can see some of the new developments, the new equipment, these traditional companies like Rheinmetall. Those are scaring the Russians quite a bit, because they have all this experience, like Rheinmetall, and they're cooperating with Lockheed, Oerlikon, all these very traditional companies, and they can even retrofit some of the most modern guns to old tanks. I mean, I saw some of the presentations on mounting a crazy modern gun on a very old tank, like a Leo 1, a Leopard 1, and there's still thousands of those Leopard 1s, and you just change out the turret. You just mount a new turret with a brand new gun, and it can do new things. And I mean, there are some YouTube channels out there where you can see individual, or the essentials of an individual battle in Ukraine. It's not just, oh, here's something blows up, somebody gets shot up, Russians get blown up, but it's more like they walk you through this operation, and you can see what a single Abrams tank can do in Ukraine, or a single Leopard 2 tank can do in Ukraine, even if it's just the A4 version, not the A7 or what they have these days. It's like it's amazing what can be done. An older tank, an Abrams is not a new tank. A Leopard 2 is not a new tank.
No,
you retrofit them. You get these people trained, and then you combine, let's say, one of these tanks with a Javelin or two, and one of these drones that can drop an anti-tank mine, because they just can draw. These drones can drop different types of explosive ammunitions, but sometimes they use these big anti-tank mines and drop them from the sky. And this is how they now design these military operations, where they use a drone bought off the internet, retrofitted, then they use an old tank and they updated the tank, and then use a Javelin or two. And this is now the reality of a war, how quickly you can adapt to these necessities. Obviously, the Russians have been paying attention. They've learned a whole lot about modern warfare. But also the Americans and everybody else has learned a lot. I think this is the new G-Wagon, I believe. This is like there used to be a Mercedes Steyr Puch military vehicle, civilian version known as the G-Wagon. It's kind of like very expensive vehicle. But the civilian the original military version was called the Wolf, and they've now updated the platform, and I think this is the new one. They call it the Rheinmetall Caracal. So it's like, yeah, all the fancy new gear. The Nordics are making all this fancy new gear. It's like we know for a fact that the Russians, in the years before the Ukraine invasion, the Russians, they had to buy all kinds of equipment from abroad. They bought stuff everywhere, so we know exactly what they've bought and what the capabilities are and what the weak points are. And they had to buy bits and pieces, right? So let's say the Ukrainians attack a group of Russians, okay? So they capture they salvage some of the Russian equipment, these Russian G-Wagons, so to say, and other vehicles, these APCs, and then the Ukrainians, sometimes they transport these Russian vehicles back to a base, and then they will disassemble it, and they will look inside, what's actually in it, and they find all these different parts and pieces, like, let's say, motor control modules made from Bosch. Somehow these things found their way into these Russian vehicles. German engine tech in these Russian vehicles, it's like 90% foreign parts or 95% foreign parts. Now, of course, this is very shameful that this even has gotten this far, but there's sort of a little silver lighting, so like a little light at the end of the tunnel. We know exactly what they're using, and we know what these bits and pieces are capable of and where the vulnerabilities are. Because if they buy a complete system, we know exactly how good or bad it is. And if they buy parts and pieces, we know how long they last. Because this is known to the manufacturers, because they can say, well, this engine control system, it needs specific amount of maintenance, or it needs replacement parts, and it needs this and it needs that, and will only last a certain number of days in operation. And so this kind of makes it easier to calculate what the Russians are capable of, because they really haven't made much by themselves. So that's going to be an interesting situation when we see European and American high-tech against sort of this traditional communist force, the Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians. They're still the spirit of the old days. That this is like, you can smell it when you see, or I can smell it when I see these Russian forces and these Russian tactics. It's very Stalinist. It's very, very classic, very old school, and very traditional, because they know nothing else.
Well, the question is whether the Russians have been sandbagging since they lost the first round of the war. Did they make a conscious decision? All right, they sent in basically divisions that were poorly trained, poorly led, and not that well equipped. They were all equipped with the older tanks, older equipment. Very strange. All of these new weapons that they supposedly have been developing, they don't see it in the battlefield. We don't see Armada tanks. We didn't see many T-90s. They didn't use their Air Force, which was interesting, and of course there were reasons given for that. It's almost like they thought, okay, we'll pull back, we'll just grind at Ukraine. Meanwhile, the war itself becomes a reason to mobilize Russia's economy, to demand sacrifices by the Russian people more and more, and to justify the propaganda. Look, NATO's fighting us, NATO's coming after us, to depict things in that light. And when you see these mobilizations that we're seeing now, which are more extensive in numbers, and you see this new equipment, military equipment in the May 9th parade, you begin to wonder, how much equipment have they been holding back? Is the training of the new people superior? And as far as they have no basic night vision equipment, they can't get an attack going before 10:30, 11 a.m. This kind of military can't function effectively in a war. But yet this new equipment, if you look, the new tanks on this May 9th parade, they've got night vision equipment. They've got special spotting gear and things for the commanders to look through. What on earth does this signify? Is there another echelon of Russian troops? Is this first strategic echelon hitting Ukraine merely meant to enable and justify the further mobilization? And
mislead the
enemy. Alarming thing was that the more intelligent Russian worker is not to be conscripted, right? They were on lists, all these jobs, you can't conscript from these people. They removed that restriction. Now they can conscript any of these folks. That means they can conscript smarter Russian people to run more sophisticated Russian machines. Whereas, what are they doing? Killing off the low IQ part of their population in frontal assaults? Is that what the Ukraine war is? Getting rid of criminals and low IQ citizens? Getting rid of unwanted parts of their population? I don't know. It makes me wonder, because I couldn't conceive they would purposely try to lose the first part of the war. I don't think they did, but yet they lived with it. They went with it. They've used this as time to build themselves up. And of course, what has NATO and America done? We've built some ammunition factories. We've increased a little bit. The Scandinavian countries got their act together, as you pointed out. Poland increased its army from 3 divisions to 5, but wait a minute. What about the big powers? What about America? No real buildup here. And China's building up massively. So it's almost like, Ukraine stopped and we can go back to sleep and just feed Ukraine. Maybe there's more to this, right? Maybe they're coming after us.
I mean, it's like over the last, I don't know, maybe 1.5 years, the public tone shifted so much in Europe. I mean, it was. I mean, even 1 year into the Ukraine war, even 2 years in the Ukraine war, it was always, politicians here in Germany and other places in Europe, all the politicians said, it's horrible, but maybe we can find some understanding with the Russians and it can all go back to normal, and we don't want to risk all that peace that we've built since 1991, which is bogus, obviously. But it was always like playing into this sentiment in the population that it's just one of those things. It's gonna pass. It's gonna go away. But since like 18 months, maybe, tone has completely shifted. The new chancellor, the new chancellor in Germany, like an old school guy, old school conservative party, so much pro Ukraine, so much pro America. And he's changed the whole tone and saying this is going to be a huge thing. No more playing around. There's no easy solution now. Let's go full on. The French have been saying the same things. British have been saying the same things. So the tone really shifted. And then we get this. The Nordic countries have a unified security policy for the first time since the Kalmar Union in the 1400s. Said Jens Stoltenberg, the former NATO Secretary General, who is now Norway's finance minister. They've reorganized the importance of deepening their military cooperation in a way that we haven't seen for several centuries. The Nordics have combined their air forces, establishing a joint Nordic Air Command in 2023. Last year, they set out a vision for common defense through 2030 under the Nordic Defense Cooperation. Finland has one of Europe's largest armed forces per capita. It can mobilize 280,000 troops in weeks, and nearly one in 6 Finns, or about 900,000, are reservists. Underground shelters across the country can house roughly the remainder of the population, pretty much everybody. Blah, blah, blah. Sweden is an engine of military innovation. The JAS-39 Gripen jet fighters, designed to operate on short runways and counter Russian aircraft, participated in NATO surveillance mission. Finland and Sweden both have mandatory conscription. In Sweden, military service is gender neutral and highly selective, making it an elite pursuit. While other European countries struggle to boost their ranks, Sweden's armed forces turn away thousands of young people each year. Norway, long criticized for underspending despite sitting on the world's largest sovereign wealth fund of $1.5 trillion, while profiting from energy prices pushed up by the Ukraine war, recently announced a doubling of its support for Kiev to more than $8 billion in 2025. So it's like stuff's happening here, stuff's happening there, stuff's happening there. But even the Europeans, they don't want to show what they got. So that makes it very, very hard to determine what direction Europe is going. Because I mean, if we all remember what the Soviet defectors told us, they gave specific numbers about the espionage infiltration of European politics, and they gave percentages like 25, let's say 25% of all important people, officials in a left-wing party in Europe, in that country, 25% are under Russian control or strong influence. The other country, it's more like 30%, this, that, and the other. And it was always like this idea of the Soviets, they're waiting for the right time, then there's a nuclear threat and a list of Russian or Soviet demands. And the Russians were expecting that in the 1980s, that European nations would simply give up. They would capitulate. They would receive the Russian threat, receive the Russian list of demands, and then say, we will comply. Because we just want to save everybody and make that choice, right? So the Russians would just move in and not have strong resistance against them. So that's kind of an offsetting factor in all of this. But it's like there's a new study out. This is from Pew Research. This came out was publicized in April, like 2-3 weeks ago. You can find it on pewresearch.org. How Americans view Russia and Putin. Half of Americans today label Russia as an enemy of the US, while 38% see Russia as a competitor and 9% see it as a partner. So roughly 90% see Russia either as an outright enemy or at least a fierce competitor, right?
Well, this is why Trump has had such pushback on his attempt to realign with Putin and to go against Ukraine. I think that they were shocked. I think the administration, they spent 2-3 weeks pushing on this, and then they found they were going to be face enormous problems within the Republican Party, let alone the Democrats, by trying to be pro-Russian. It just wasn't going to work in our society. So I think that's an interesting poll, what it reflects.
Yeah, let me just put that up on the screen. I think I have the most relevant parts in my notes here. Now this is the website. Let me just click away these cookies here. How Americans view Russia and Putin. Blah, blah, blah. While most Americans, including majorities of Democrats and Republicans, continue to express negative views of Russia and Putin, smaller shares of Republicans express very unfavorable opinions of Russia and no confidence at all in Putin than in 2024. Let me just get the differences here. Republicans are about as likely to see Russia as an enemy now as they were before the current conflict in Ukraine began. In January of 2022, just before Russia invaded Ukraine, 39% of Republicans saw Russia as an outright enemy. This share increased to 69% in the early months of the war and has fallen steadily since. So here's the graph, and maybe I can just make this a little bit bigger here. people can see that better. Okay, so this is total on the left, and then it's split up between Republican and leaning Republican and Democrat leaning Democrat. So total, we get the current numbers here, March of 25. 50% of Americans say Russia is an outright enemy. 38% say Russia is a competitor. Only 9% see Russia as a partner. So it's like a huge, crazy majority that has a negative or very negative or very negative view of Russia. When we look at the Republicans here, Republican leaning, it's only 40% that say Russia is an enemy compared to the general 50% all in all. So 40% say enemy and 45% say a competitor, and 12% say that Russia is a partner. So not that much big of a difference compared to the entire country. With the Democrats here, it's 62% saying Russia's an enemy, 30% say competitor, and 6% say it's a partner. Okay, those are very bleak numbers, let's say, for the Russians. And then they looked at the favorability, partisanship, and confidence in Putin. Okay, so on the left is total, then we get Republicans, and we get Democrats. So, as of now, 57% of all Americans say 57% of all Americans say they have no confidence in Putin at all. 26% say not much confidence in Putin. 10% say some confidence in Putin, and 1% says a lot of confidence in Putin. Republicans on this side here, Republicans say, or 1% say they have a lot of confidence in Putin. 16% say some confidence. 35% say little confidence, and 43% say no confidence in Putin at all. That's bleak for the Russians. Now with the Democrats, also 1% say a lot of confidence in Putin, 5% say some confidence, 18% say a little confidence, and 72% say no confidence at all. So yeah, there's some kind of a difference, but not as much difference as the Russians would have hoped, I guess.
No, that's right. This is more evidence that sort of common sense public opinion is more right on than some of this idea to try to do a reverse Nixon and try to appeal to Russia. I think people have a deeper sense. A lot of times the public is really clueless and is easily misled. But in this case, it looks like the attempt to lead public opinion didn't work.
Yeah. And here's another one. Here's another one. This is from 24 July. So this is last year. Also, Pew Research Center, NATO seen favorably in member states, confidence in Zelensky down in Europe and the US. But that doesn't make much of a difference, because I think when you look at these numbers in comparison, all in all, it seems more like people don't view Zelensky as a man with enough experience, because yeah, he's been an entertainer in his past, a very hardworking guy, married with children, but he's not like an Eisenhower. He's not like Winston Churchill, right? He doesn't have.
Well, Eisenhower wasn't like Eisenhower.
Yeah, well, but there's kind of a difference.
When you read up on him.
So people may not see Zelensky as the guy with the necessary experience or something.
Well,
But
I think
still,
now he's been president of Ukraine for what, 5 years now? Almost 6 years, right?
yeah.
So maybe he has the experience now. He's got more experience being the president of his country than Trump has being the president of the
And also,
United
I mean,
States.
there have been some competitors to Zelensky that could have gotten the job leading the country, but when you look at some of these gruff-looking military men, right? Some of these like Zaluzhny and others, they got all the background. They've started training even in Soviet days, and they know all the Soviet training, and then they made this whole shift. And now they're competing against the Russians, and they're very gruff people, very gruff looking, and they're not good speakers necessarily. Like,
Alex, soldiers generally don't do that well as political leaders. I mean, Eisenhower's an exception. I think he was a better president than he was a general. That's a controversial thing to say if you study his military record. But it's very, very typical that military men do not quite have the breadth of background and education to be political leaders. You have, of course, exceptions. But
it says here, favorable views of NATO are up significantly in Turkey, of all places, since our last survey there in 2019, and Hungarians have also grown more favorable toward the alliance in the past year. I mean,
you've got Russia, Alex. Russia has invaded the second largest country in Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, the Hungarians
brutalized the I mean, they've killed and they've kidnapped over 20,000 children. Civilians.
Even despite all this Russian propaganda, all this Russian influence in Hungary, that didn't make much of a dent. I mean,
no, of course not. And I think that Hungarian government's going to be in trouble because, look, the Hungarians were occupied by the Soviets, by the Russians after World War II, and there's no shortage of the bad feeling for Russia that is in Hungary, just like it's in Romania and Poland, the Baltic states. I don't know. You'll have to speak for East Germany. They were sort of the privileged people of the communist Warsaw Pact countries, but they were special for Moscow.
Well, it was like window dressing, right? I mean, East Germany was window dressing. It had to look good or better than the other. It had to be like the one-eyed among the blind here. In Hungary, Poland, and Turkey, we asked respondents whether NATO membership is important for their country's security. More than 8 in 10 adults in Hungary and Poland say it is important, and roughly 6 in 10 share this belief in Turkey. 8 in 10 adults in Sweden have confidence in Zelensky. A roughly equal share in Hungary do not. Yeah, but that's not the deciding factor here, how they view Zelensky. It says here.
And by the way, none of these other countries are going to be voting in the next election if Zelensky even wants to run. I mean, look, you've been an entertainer all your life. You got dragooned into being president of your country in wartime, which has got to be an extremely difficult experience to be the leader of a country in wartime. Would Zelensky even want to continue that grueling work that he has to do? And I think if you imagine almost anybody else, I think Zelensky maybe is unique in his ability to communicate and to take on the role that the Ukrainian people need.
Yeah,
Ukrainian people don't need they don't need a Churchill, they don't need a Lincoln. They need a guy who is going to represent them truly, that's going to be humble in representing them. Because the problem, this whole Soviet thing with the cult of personality, is that those the big shot is the one that sells out to Moscow.
Yeah, I think you're right on this. I think you're right on this because Zelensky seems like a man of the people. He doesn't have a background that suggests imperialism in the traditional sense or any of that grandiosity. You know, he's not out to. His
wealth was gotten by being an entertainer. Yeah. So he didn't need to get any money under the table. He's not a businessman in the normal sense who has chocolate shops still running in Moscow when they had the stadium debates, when Zelensky debated his opponent.
So yeah, I mean, it's like it says views of Russia and Putin remain largely negative across 35 countries polled. A median of 65% have an unfavorable view of Russia, and 73% lack confidence in the Russian leader to do the right thing regarding world affairs. Yeah, and then they look at even the right wing or the extreme right wing, like the AfD party. It says in Germany, for example, about a quarter of supporters of the AfD party had confidence in Putin in 2023. Just a quarter. Now 45% do, an increase of 19 points and close to pre-invasion levels of confidence. But it's still just 45%. And now with the with the Trump administration, they now have a certain choice of who do we align ourselves with? The Americans and Trump and the Republicans?
If the AfD is only, 45% now after the Russians have obviously pumped up the propaganda machine to win over people in the AfD, if that's as good as they can do, they're really having trouble, aren't they?
I mean, even a majority in the AfD doesn't really... A majority doesn't even like Putin and the Russians. They don't trust them. I mean, it's like if they force the issue...
Who would trust people that break every agreement and invade their neighbors? Who trusts them? The Russians have invaded Georgia. They've invaded... they annexed Crimea. They invaded Donbass. Then they invaded all of Ukraine.
And honestly, the AfD...
the Baltic states.
Yeah, and even the AfD has sort of a traditional problem, right? Because if you wanna get people moving and you want to get people to... do things and be active, activists, you need to mobilize the crazies, because the crazies, they do the most, right? So the AfD, to get where they are now, the AfD had to placate the crazies and say, yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we're so hardcore. And so they got some success with that. But it's like they're splitting their own party. If it comes push to shove, more than half of the AfD supporters, more than half of these AfD supporters, they will switch to the Republicans. They will switch to America. They will switch to American conservatives and not the Russians. So you could cut the party in half.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that of course the Dark Enlightenment, Nick Land, Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Moldbug, this neo-reactionary element in conservatism. I should say that the danger there is that the American conservative Republican Party, which had existed especially during the Reagan years, that had such a positive influence on the country in many ways, it is a mix of libertarians and traditional conservatives here in America. But now this neo-reaction is something different, that they've tried to latch onto MAGA. They're trying to pull MAGA in this direction and move Trump. And you've got Vice President Vance, who quotes Yarvin. And what people don't realize is that since the French Revolution, conservatives have been feeling kind of the logic of the advance of a kind of liberalism and radicalism. Radical egalitarian freedom, leftism. They've always been trying to accommodate, trying to be reasonable, and feeling somewhat guilty. Like, well, did we really support colonialism and racism and all these other things and authoritarianism and this and that? And so there's been this conservatism has been this partly hesitant, guilty. Let's negotiate. Let's compromise. And it's characteristic is somebody like de Gaulle, right, in France, who really made his career by making side deals with the French communists, and ended up getting subverted by the KGB in his own intelligence staff. And there's been books written about this by Frenchmen. And you have the problem in Germany with the CDU. Has always had this problem until you get to Angela Merkel, who is a very strange figure coming out of the East German Communist Party. Into this position, and you have this neo-reaction. You have the movement of people like Lindy Lee and so on, people who were advisors to Biden and Hillary Clinton, who, I was always a conservative. It's like, you were? Really? Suddenly it's just like the communists telling, in the 1980s, telling their party members to join the Solidarity in Poland and take it over from the inside. you got this funny thing where with the Nazi Party, and the experience in Germany is the Nazi Party. This is, people talk about this here in America. Is it a left party or is it a right party? One guy is going after me on X saying that Hitler was a Marxist. No, not exactly. And of course, yeah, there's Rubio giving the talking points.
Well, there's panic. There's panic among the right wingers because the AfD the AfD may get banned. They've just been
extreme right wing party. Yeah,
and it's like
yeah.
The German intelligence, they just released their new assessment of the AfD. And this is like the third stage of an assessment. And when the previous stage, which is based on intelligence information gathered, in a previous stage, when that was reached, the intelligence service was allowed to use its full arsenal against the AfD. So they can spy on anybody who is an AfD member or attached to the AfD to collect more material. And now we're at this point where there's a new assessment that's 1,000 pages long. And the new assessment says, now we know for sure. We are now certain this is an actual extremist party. And so the next step could likely be the initiation of a banning procedure, which is like the politicians have to tell the highest court, you have to look at this because you're the legal authority. You know the law best. Here is all the material we gathered. And all our lawyers, what they're saying, that this party should be banned. And then the highest court has to look at this and they have to decide yes or no, does it get banned or not. And this has happened before, since 1945. Also, thanks to the Americans, by the way, the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany was banned, I think, in the 50s. Maybe it was the 60s. Regardless,
Hitler got rid of him after the Reichstag fire in 1933.
Well, it was but then after 1945, there was the whole new legal system, which was built by Britain and America here. The new legal system was designed to combat communism and fascism alike. So,
yes,
all the core elements of fascism, all the core elements of communism.
See, the thing is that ideologically, you take Nazism or fascism, National Socialism, you find out what was its doctrine, what was its dogma. Well, it wasn't really that easy to pin down, right? It was very opaque what it was that they were supposed to believe. You know, it was very much centered on Hitler's cult of personality more than anything. And what you have is the idea, remember the Nazis said they were a revolutionary party. They said that.
Not conservative. Not conservative. Revolutionary.
Right. No, not conservative. And remember, they came to power originally in a coalition with the conservatives in 1933 before the Reichstag fire.
And the Nazis hated conservatism.
Yes, the vice chancellor, very famously, who should have been the chancellor, what was his name? He said, "Oh, we can control Hitler. We can keep Hitler in a box." They couldn't. They couldn't do it. The thing is the thing I worry about neo-reaction is it's revolutionary.
Yeah,
just like the left is.
Yeah, but there's
even though it claims to be far right.
Yeah, but the whole legal system here that's been built since 1945, the whole legal system is targeting the very essence of communism and fascism. So the beliefs and convictions and plans that are most dear, that are most important to fascists and communists, those things are illegal. Now, when the KPD was banned, the Communist Party of Germany was banned after 1945. Maybe a year ago, I read the original court decision, the original verdict, and it was interesting to see it was built on two pillars. One was that Moscow was running this thing. It's not a German party. It's not really a normal party. It's
just like the Communist Party USA. It wasn't really Americans were technically running it.
And so that is enough. That is enough.
Moscow.
If any party is in Germany is just the tool of Russia, for example, that's enough to make it illegal. So nowadays, with the AfD, with some of these new left parties, they could be banned like this with the same argument. And the other pillar was Marxism-Leninism, the whole strategy of how we get there and what do we do when we get there. This whole thing is outlawed. Now, with the same argument, you could even ban the mainline leftist party in this country, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it's like it's been built in by the best lawyers from the Americans over here, the British, and then the German, the new German lawyers. They created this whole thing, and there's another element to this, which is so complicated that even our experts cannot understand this. There's like a intelligence privilege for the Americans and Britain, but mostly Americans, since 1945. Most people don't even know about this, but it's very complex legalese. And so Americans, they have privilege when it comes to intelligence on German soil. Gathering, operations, whom to take out of circulation, anything. If the Americans intervene, German intelligence has to say, okay, it's your decision. It's not our decision, it's your decision. These things are still in place. And so now when we see this, what I just had up on the screen, this is German government-run media. This is like this is not private media, this is pure government media here. It says, Rubio was not happy that the AfD party was now officially labeled as definitive right-wing extremist, labeled by an intelligence agency, not by the politicians. Well, the politicians, of course, they can decide who runs the intelligence service. That's a whole nother thing. But regardless, the AfD is now considered a guaranteed right-wing extremist party, and Rubio wasn't happy. Now, we saw some weeks ago at the around the Munich Security Conference, we saw J.D. Vance visiting, and he had some warm words for the right-wing parties over here, but there was also like a warning between the lines, and people either didn't see it or they didn't want to admit that it was there because it doesn't fit a left-wing agenda to point out what Vance was really saying. So Vance was basically saying if a right-wing party in Europe is pro-America and is at least normal enough, then this party can continue to exist. You know, the Americans can work with those parties, but it has to be pro-America. It has to be somewhat normal. And then Vance and his wife, they actually visited a former concentration camp, a historical site, and made some statements to the press saying this can never, ever, ever happen again. And this we take this very, very seriously. We draw the line and we enforce that line. And this was not just some thing. I don't think this was just for show. This was just to have some plausible deniability. I think this was a kind of a mixed message, but for a reason, saying, here's the line, we enforce it, you either stay within these boundaries or we can use our arsenal to destroy even a party, which happened before, not just with the KPD, but also with an extreme right-wing party in the 50s. Here, it was called the SRP.
The big question in my mind for you, Alex, is the AfD party being declared an extremist party and having restrictions put on it and having the intelligence services infiltrating it and bullying it, is this just going to make it stronger? I mean, do you really want to use the state against such a large political party? I mean, isn't that counterproductive? Isn't there a better way to handle this?
It's not a purely German decision because we're not a fully sovereign country. We haven't been since 1945, and it's like German intelligence is super small. It's incredibly small, and German intelligence has relied so much on American intelligence. You know, when it comes to preventing terrorism, this, that, and the other. Protecting against foreign espionage.
Could you explain the sovereignty thing to the American listeners here? What you mean by that and why this did not change in 1990 when Germany was reunited?
Well, it's like this. I mean, we know for a fact, and we now have archives and documents and cases, you know, lots of them. We know for certain what the political landscape was like after 1945. So basically the Russians or the Soviets, they would use every trick in the book to gain influence in Western Europe. They would hand over suitcases of money to anybody who was pro-Moscow and organizing this. So this was not a fair, normal political playing field, right? So imagine you're a political party, you're a conservative, normal party, and you try to compete with these communists out there in the elections, and they're being fed money left and right, suitcases full of cash and gold, and this, that, and the other, and these left-wing parties. They were being constantly fed intelligence against, the conservatives. So let's say you're up for election, and suddenly there's things in the press. Oh, the left, they have a leak. They know something embarrassing about a right-wing politician or conservative politician. They found out something sketchy or something in the guy's past or whatnot. So it was not a fair, normal playing field. And this is why the American administrations, they had the right to intervene, they had the right to influence, and also there was no restriction on the CIA and other agencies when it came to foreign operations, right? So there was no legal barrier, really, for the CIA and others to finance normal parties in Europe and funnel money to them and supply them with intelligence, right? And then there's this thing I mentioned before a couple of minutes ago, that there's an American privilege when it comes to intelligence in Germany. So it's not a normal country. We're not a normal country. And after the reunification, especially, German authorities, German intelligence, German federal police, all these German entities, they were too small, too inexperienced, utterly incapable of protecting against Russian espionage after reunification, after 1989 and 1991. So again, not a normal playing field, right? There's just too many of these people from the East who are still spying. We know about a sizable number of Stasi assets. We have a lot of files on them, but those were not the only ones who were operating from Eastern Germany against Western Germany. You had the Czech STB, you had the KGB, you had all these other agencies, and so again, not a normal country, not a normal playing field. So there was always this American deep-rooted, deep-seated presence here, and this American presence was also including corporations that had been rebuilt after 1945. Large corporations. This is all kind of entangled and organized, and so we're not a normal country. We're not a normal sovereign country. And when the Soviet Union supposedly ended, we got this European Union thing, and that's when we, as a German nation, so to say, this is when we lost almost all of our sovereignty to Brussels, basically like this bureaucratic entity, somewhere in Belgium or whatever they are these days, and these other European entities. So not a normal country, and this is why Americans, they still get involved. And even back in the 50s, there was a Nazi successor party, was called the SRP. And they made some gains, they gained some ground and had some success in elections, and they were completely infiltrated, and then they were banned. And that was the end of it. And when you get banned as a political party, you lose all the party money, you lose everything. Right now, it's been a bit complicated in the last years because the Ministry of the Interior was run by a very, very left-wing person, and so this is why in our media and American media, there's an outcry when something happens against the AfD, even though the AfD around half of the AfD is against America per se. So there's an outcry because it looks like, oh my God, there's these left-wing left-wing forces using means against a right-wing force. But it's so much more complicated than that. And it's like, maybe the AFD can be turned. I think this is what Rubio is after and Vance is after. Maybe the AFD can be turned. The AFD will have to decide.
People don't like to be strong-armed, though. They don't like to be turned in that way.
Sure, but I mean, it's like when you establish a new political party in Germany, you need a lot of money. And when you get a lot of money from weird places, do they control the party? Is this even a German party? Who runs this thing? I mean, we know about some shady aristocrats.
A lesbian who lived in China? A lesbian who lived in China?
yeah. I mean, look at this thing here. Where's this darn story? I mean, I got this in my notes here under espionage. Okay, this is. Oh, let me just pull that up on the screen so people can get a sense of this this utter madness. Okay. Now I mentioned this case before. This man, this very unpleasant appearing man that I'm gonna put up on the screen here. Now, this guy, Mr. Kra, he's been very, very successful in the AFD party. Now, he always wanted to be the big guy, be the big man. And yeah, he's got some interesting contacts. Now, he's had a very close assistant that's been managing things for him or doing things for him. And that assistant had recently been arrested on suspicion of spying for China. And another person connected to those guys has also been arrested on suspicion of spying for China. Now, Mr. Kra is a huge fan of China. He's a big, big, big fan of China, even though that's a communist country. But he has no problem with that. And this does not sound conservative to me.
And it doesn't even sound reactionary. Although reactionaries, they make these funny alliances with communists traditionally.
But this is silly. This is completely silly. I mean, it's like, of course he's...
Well, silly is not... Yeah, silly is dangerous in politics. It's like, here's a hand grenade. Now I'm going to behave silly with a hand grenade. Yeah. There's a lot of dangerous powers in politics, and you're going to be silly?
Yeah, and it's like
that's really dangerous.
He's not the only guy. The head of the party, that lesbian woman who used to work for Goldman Sachs, right? This woman who's leading the party, apparently, who knows who's really pulling the strings. Apparently, she didn't know either back then. A couple of years ago, she said so herself, because of all the funny money going around and all the secret networks going around. But this woman, she also really likes China. She's heading the party, Mrs. Alice Weidel, and she really likes China. She spent years in China. Apparently, she speaks Mandarin, and she has a PhD, I think, and her thesis was about revamping the Chinese retirement system or something like that. One of these days I'm gonna get a copy of that thing that she wrote. And so like they're making all these nice words about China, and we should be aligned with China, and this is the future, and this is how we fight the globalists and all that. I mean, it's just like, what is this? Is this a German party at all? Is this a legal entity at all? Hopefully we're gonna find out and get some definitive answers, but it just looks like it looks bad, really bad. And of course, anybody can say the magic words and say, we're nationalist, we're right-wing, we like Trump, we like traditional this and traditional that. Anybody can say these words, but then these guys, they love China and they want to align themselves with China. They have Chinese connections. And it's like, come on. I mean, Rubio should know about this. I mean, he must get briefed about the world, places like Germany, and
But look at who the head of our intelligence services are here in the U.S. Tulsi Gabbard has been notoriously pro-Russian in her positions. People will argue that she's just trying to be fair and balanced, but there's a problem there. And of course, if she's picking the debriefers, if she is herself debriefing, I don't know if she is. What is she telling the Secretary of State? What are these people telling them? I hope they're telling them the truth about what's going on.
Because
Russia is a very dark place.
I mean, every outrageous thing is always an opportunity, I mean, this is how spies think. This is how the intelligence world thinks. If they see somebody doing something that person shouldn't be doing, that's an entryway. That's like a doorway. That's like an opportunity you may be able to exploit. And I don't think Rubio would say these things. And Elon Musk said things about the AfD, very positive things about the AfD. And Vance was saying some things. I don't think they would be doing this if they. I don't think they would be doing this if they wouldn't be looking for an opportunity. You know, maybe we can change the AfD. Maybe we can gain so much influence over the AfD that most people in the AfD, a majority would be pro Trump. You know, and most AfD supporters would then be pro America, pro Trump, and not pro Russia. Maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe we can change them and influence them, and then. Maybe at some point in the future, if the party changes significantly, maybe then we will see a coalition government between the traditional conservative party and the AfD. If the AfD changes, I mean, we talked about this in one of the recent episodes when the one of the most powerful media companies in Germany, the Springer company, one that was rebuilt after World War II, basically by the Americans, by the American occupation. They decided who gets to publish things, and they built up this Springer entity, and it's always been pro-America. It's always been embedded in the Bilderberg group and the Atlantic Bridge and all that. And so then recently, a major Springer newspaper published a translation of the text from Elon Musk. You know, Elon Musk posted this thing about the AfD saving Germany, blah, blah, blah. You know, the very positive piece about the AfD, and this was then translated and published by Springer. Why? You know, were they told, this could be going in a better direction, there's going to be some changes, and we want to be ahead of this, and then maybe there's going to be a coalition between the CDU and the AfD. And then maybe they get 50% of the votes, because this is what's been, I mean, currently, one party is at like 27 in the polls, something like that, and the other party is 23, so it's like 50%. 50% of voters, half of the voters, half of the voters vote right wing. So all you need is change the AfD, then you get a majority, right? So this is kind of what's been brewing over here. And it's very, very secret. It's very, very shady, and we see things, and we can tell from past cases, because if you study the right wing after 1945 over here, so many organizations, they all thought the same things. It's all based on traditional conspiracy mythology. It's based on this crazy revisionism. They all act the same. They all think the same, and they can all be infiltrated the same way. And sometimes, I mean, especially in modern days, these extreme right-wingers, they may get some new coaching by the Russians, for example, to be more professional, to shield themselves, to, you know, not make the exact same mistakes as all these right-wing organizations before them. But even then, it's questionable if that's going to be successful. I mean, there was what was that point I was trying to make here? In addition to that, I mean, it's like shielding yourself. I mean, how do you prevent being found out by the Americans, or how do you prevent being exposed by the British intelligence service? How do you prevent all that? How do you meet your handler? How do you meet a contact? How do you set up a meet? How do you launder the money that the Russians give you? How do you hide the money? There's all kinds of things that have to be in place, even when you get that coaching. I mean, we know how it was done in the Cold War. You get recruited, and they would secretly drive you to Karlshorst in East Berlin. They get you in a room with the Stasi and maybe the KGB, and then you would have to sign your declaration that you're being recruited, you get your first payment, and you have to sign that first payment. They have your signature. And this is how it was done. And then they would give you first bit of training and then some more training, and you would go on a holiday and get professional instructions, how to communicate with your handlers, how do you communicate, how do you not expose yourself too quickly. So that was the name of the game, and in essence, this game has not changed. It has never changed. And it's like these people, some of these people from the AFD, they seem like things are way over their head. They're not professional enough, because these politicians nowadays, they don't have a background as a soldier. They don't have a background in, during the rough times. They grew up in post-war Germany, in the miracle economy. They were there was affluence. People were driving nice cars and buying houses, and things were easier, right? You go to a school, you go to university, this, that, and the other. You rise up the ranks, business contacts, this, that, and the other. These people are not necessarily tough. They're not oftentimes equipped to handle the stress of a traitor. And we know how stressful it is. We've seen it with the Cambridge Five. We've seen it with all the other famous traitors and moles. They would start drinking a lot. They would go nuts. They would have nightmares. They would be afraid of talking in their sleep. They would be under constant pressure. And of course, I mean, if things have stayed the same in essence, that means German intelligence is infiltrated by the Russians. So the Russians could actually manipulate investigations into the AFD and others, and they could make some bits of evidence disappear, right? And so it's so that it never seems quite enough to ban the party. That's a possibility. It's a strong possibility. And it's also weird that for so many years, the major left-wing party here, they would run the Ministry of the Interior, they would run the intelligence service, and they were sitting on all this evidence against the AFD. And even in public, the people were collecting evidence, and it was looking so horrible. But there was no banning of the party, no initializing it, because you can't just ban a party. It's a drawn-out process, and the evidence has to be there, has to speak for itself. But the left-wing party, which has always been a fan of Moscow, the left-wing party was dragging its feet. Oh, it's not the time. Well, the AFD is not going to grow that big because, people are not going to accept that party. We'll just wait and see. And now the AFD has gained in the polls. And it took so long. Why did it take so long? I think one answer is Russian influence, and the other factor, I believe, is American influence, because I think the Americans are trying to change the AFD and turn the AFD into an ally.
Yeah, well, that is an interesting way to put it. I have to do another broadcast now, so we have to end. But this has been interesting about the AfD party and where it could be going and what's going to happen in Germany with the buildup of the Russians and the pressure on NATO. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this has been Friends and Enemies. My co-host has been Alex Benesch.